Carbonara is a simple dish, but it's surprisingly hard to make it perfectly. It's so hard to get the eggs just right. I usually end up with either undercooked eggs and a soupy sauce or a scrambled egg sauce. But what happens if we just don't use eggs? Is it possible to swap out the eggs for some other ingredients and still make a great carbonara? The answer is yes, and in this video we're going to do exactly that. We're going to dive into the science of carbonara to understand what exactly the eggs are doing. Then we'll use that understanding to replace the eggs with some other ingredients that do the same thing. But before we do any of that, let's remind ourselves how a traditional carbonara is usually made. So carbonara is traditionally made with just 5 ingredients. It's usually a hard cheese, eggs, black pepper, pasta, and also some sort of cured pork. It's usually pancetta or guanciale. This is literally just bacon. Really what you're looking for is any sort of meat that has a lot of fat in it. First things first, you want to boil your pasta. Get a big pot of water on to boil, add some salt, and then cook this until it's al dente. Grab a couple of eggs and separate the egg yolk from the white. Egg whites, throw them in the bin, crack in some black pepper, about 12.5 grams of parmesan, and then whisk all that together. Frying pan, medium heat, extra virgin olive oil. Once the oil's hot, I'm throwing in about 50 grams of bacon. We're not trying to brown the meat here, we just want to render the fat, so we need to do it on quite a low heat. You can see the bacon starting to brown there, the fat's starting to render. That'll probably do. At this point we want to get with pasta, and literally just tongue in the pasta. The pasta water in there. Then you basically just want to go absolutely mental with the tongs and slurp up all the sauce. That is the technical description for that, by the way. Then we want to turn the heat off and we want to bring in the egg and cheese mixture. It's really important to make sure the heat's off here or else you will definitely scramble the eggs. Put that in there, just mix it up. Wow, that actually looks a lot better than I expected. The objective is absolutely to make the biggest mess in your kitchen you can, by the way, hence why I'm slapping this around. Garnish with a bit of parmesan and some black pepper. And there it is. That's a bog standard carbonara. It tastes great, but it's probably nothing you haven't seen before, right? But it's risky. The eggs can easily scramble and turn that nice sauce into a coagulated, stodgy mess. But this can be avoided. To do that, we first need to understand the science of the carbonara. At its most basic, a carbonara sauce is just an emulsion. But what exactly is an emulsion? Well, there are some liquids that just naturally don't mix together. If you try to mix together oil and vinegar, they'll quickly separate. This happens because fat and water, in this case oil and vinegar, do not mix together. But if we give that mixture a firm shake, it'll form a creamy, cohesive sauce. When you force together two liquids that usually don't mix, as we've done here, you've made an emulsion. And what we've just created here specifically is a very basic vinaigrette. But it won't take long for the oil and vinegar to separate again. That's because there's nothing forcing the liquids to stay together. They'll begin separating the moment you stop mixing them. But there is a way to stop the liquids from separating permanently. If you add a small amount of mustard to the mixture, then shake it up again, this time the emulsion will stay together. The reason this happens is because mustard contains certain molecules that means it can attract both water and fat. And so it acts like a kind of glue that holds the oil and vinegar together. We call ingredients with these properties emulsifiers. And mustard is just one example. There are hundreds of synthetic and natural emulsifiers, including eggs. As mentioned, a carbonara sauce is also just an emulsion. In this case, it's an emulsion between pasta water and egg. Eggs are a great ingredient to use in emulsions. Alongside hundreds of proteins and various nutrients, eggs also contain plenty of fat and a natural emulsifier called lecithin. That means an egg provides 2 of the 3 ingredients we need to make an emulsion: the fat and the emulsifier. In fact, both the fat and the lecithin are mainly concentrated in the egg's yolk. So we can actually make the carbonara sauce without the egg whites. Using just egg yolks will give us a richer, thicker sauce. So all we need to do to make an emulsion is mix the egg yolk with something water-based, like pasta water, for example. But a carbonara sauce isn't just made up of egg and water. There's one more ingredient. You see, pasta water isn't just regular water. You can see here that the pasta water is much cloudier than normal water. That's because the pasta water is full of starch that the pasta has released into the water as it's cooked. The reason this starch is important for us is because it thickens our sauce. You've probably used corn flour before to make a sauce or a soup thicker. Well, the starch from pasta basically does the same job. The more starch we use, the thicker our carbonara sauce will be. However, pasta can only release so much starch into the water. When you're boiling pasta, for any given amount of pasta, the more water that you use, the more diluted its starch content will be. In other words, more water means less starch, and less starch means a thinner sauce. So the key to getting as much starch as possible from your pasta is to use as little water as possible. So that's how a carbonara sauce is made. It's an emulsion between pasta water and the fat from the egg, held together by the egg's natural emulsifiers and thickened by the pasta starch. With all that in mind, how do we make an eggless carbonara? Well, the eggs are bringing two things to the sauce: fat and lecithin. So all we need to do to make an eggless carbonara is replace the egg with a different fat and a different emulsifier, and we'll end up with similar results. And there's loads of different combinations that we can use. And we may not even need the pasta water. You see, that pasta water is doing two things. First, as we've already discussed, the pasta starch helps to thicken the sauce. Second, the heat from the pasta water helps to cook the egg. Well, the starch is absolutely optional. Yes, it will thicken the sauce, but the sauce will be fine anyway. If we want to keep the sauce thick, we can just mix less water into the emulsion. And since we're getting rid of the eggs, there's nothing to actually cook. In short, the pasta water isn't offering much to the dish. But if we're not going to use pasta water, we still need to use some sort of water-based liquid in order to make an emulsion. So what could we use instead? Put simply, we can use any water-based liquid. So with all that in mind, let's put together a better, eggless version of a carbonara. Alright, so at this point we've done all the same stuff. We've boiled the pasta separately. I'm starting to render the fat from the bacon. I haven't mixed together the cheese and the eggs and the black pepper because there's no eggs, so there's pointless mixing anything. I haven't actually tried this variant before, but based on the theory that I've got, I feel like this is going to work. I'm going to use butter here. You could use any combination of fat and something that has emulsifying properties, but butter has both. As I've explained, we don't need starch in this to actually make it work, so I'm not actually going to use any pasta water. I'm going to use a little bit of homemade chicken stock instead of pasta water, which will hopefully make the dish a little bit richer. Yeah, stabbing it. That's how you get it to render faster. That'll do. I'm going to try and get as little pasta water into the pan as possible. One interesting thing is because we're not using eggs anymore, we don't actually need to turn the heat down. We can just leave it on medium heat. Butter, maybe more. I don't know. Get that to the bottom so it melts. Then we're going to mix in the chicken stock. Let that melt. If you don't have homemade chicken stock, you can just use some over the counter. It's not a drug. Some store-bought chicken stock, or you don't have to use chicken stock. You can use anything you want, any liquid you like, milk, wine, whatever. This looks really dry. I'm going to add some more butter, and I'm going to add just a splash of the pasta water, just to give it a bit more liquid consistency. That looks nice. Since we're saying goodbye to tradition, I'm going to throw in some garlic granules and a tiny bit of oregano. So without eggs, there's probably a lot of people out there who are saying, well, this isn't even carbonara anymore. That's completely fine, just don't call it that. Just call it pasta with butter or pasta with bacon or whatever you want. It doesn't matter. There's no value in sticking to tradition just for tradition's sake. Like, if there's a better way to do it, just do it. Anyway, let's plate this up. With a bit of parmesan. Ooh, I forgot to add the parmesan. Let's pretend that I added the parmesan to this. Oh dear. There's an eggless carbonara. So even if you're not a traditionalist or a purist or whatever, whatever I said, you might still want an eggy version of a carbonara because you might just like eggs. That's completely fine. We can still improve the recipe while keeping the traditional ingredients. So to figure out how to do that, let's go back to the science. As we've already talked about, the real challenge of a traditional carbonara is temperature control. We need to cook the eggs just enough to form a tight sauce, but not so long that the eggs scramble. So how can we achieve that? First, we need to understand some basic egg science. Simply put, eggs are made up of water, fat, and protein. And it's the egg's proteins that cause all the trouble. If you look at an egg's raw proteins at a microscopic level, what you'll see is a bunch of folded molecules. If we start cooking the egg, those proteins will start to unfold into long strings. As they unfold, the proteins start latching onto one another, trapping the egg's water between them and forming a cohesive, solid mass. This process of unfolding proteins is called denaturing. But if we continue to apply heat to the egg, Those proteins will grip each other tighter and tighter. They'll eventually grip each other so tight that they'll squeeze all the water out of the egg and form into dry clumps. This process is called coagulation. Now, the objective as far as carbonara is concerned is to denature the eggs so that they're not raw, but not coagulate them so that we don't scramble them. So how do we do that? Well, there's three things we can do. First, we need to get rid of the egg whites. Eggs are mainly made up of protein, but eggs aren't made up of just one kind of protein, but rather of dozens of different proteins, and different proteins have different denaturing and coagulation temperatures. The proteins that are in the egg whites are different to the proteins in the egg yolks. Those in the egg yolks actually denature at a higher temperature than those in the egg whites. That means if we remove the egg whites from the sauce, we increase the sauce's coagulation temperature and in turn increase our margin for error. Second, we need to make sure that we're only adding the egg and cheese mixture to the pan when the pan is off the heat. If we rely on the direct heat from the hob's burner, we'd have to keep a very close eye on the pan to make sure that the eggs don't coagulate and scramble. If we instead only add the mixture to the pan while it's off the heat, we can gently cook the eggs using the heat of the pasta water, and whatever heat is left in the pan. This massively reduces the chances of the eggs scrambling. Third, and most importantly, we need to add our hot pasta water to the egg and cheese mixture directly instead of adding it to the pan. Now, this might sound so inconsequential, but if we do it this way around, we can reduce the chance of the eggs scrambling. You see, as we've already discussed, as we cook an egg, its proteins begin to latch onto one another. But if we dilute the egg mixture with other ingredients, we're literally adding more space between the proteins. And by doing this, it makes it harder for the proteins to grip each other as they unfold. And that's simply because they're further away from each other. This in turn increases the time it takes for the eggs to coagulate. Think about it like this. It's a stupid example, but imagine two people trying to hug each other. If they're right next to each other, they'll be able to hug each other straight away with no problems. But now, imagine there's loads of people between them. It's going to be a lot harder for them to make contact, right? Of course, where there's a will, there's a way. They will hug eventually, but it'll just take them more time to reach each other. In the same way, when we dilute the egg with other ingredients, we're making it harder for the proteins to make contact. They will eventually still coagulate, we can't stop that from happening, but by diluting the mixture, we're increasing the time it takes for that to happen, further increasing our margin for error. Alright, so let's put all of that together and make a more foolproof traditional carbonara. Okay, so this recipe I have actually tried, and I know this one works. And if I'm making a traditional carbonara from now on, I'm going to do it this way because it's so much easier. So I've already boiled the pasta. We're going to render the bacon soon. But first we need to mix together the eggs and the cheese and what have you. First I'm going to separate the egg whites and the egg yolks. It's 2 egg yolks. Again, 12.5 grams of parmesan. What else? That's it. The difference is though, I've got a couple of tablespoons of the pasta water here. Instead of adding that to the pan with the bacon and the pasta and everything else, I'm whisking it into the bowl with the egg and the cheese. So I've got a tablecloth down so that I can whisk with one hand while I slowly pour it in. And this is basically just going to dilute the egg mixture to stop the proteins from coagulating at lower temperatures. That might be a touch too much pasta water actually, but we'll see. We'll put that aside for now. The hob on medium heat, extra virgin olive oil. Once it's hot, throw in the bacon. We'll just leave that for 5 minutes or so to render. So as before, we're mixing the pasta into the bacon. We've already added that pasta water to the egg and cheese mixture, so try not to get too much pasta water in the pan when you're adding it. Right, so just as before, basically we add the egg and cheese mixture with the pasta water to the pan while the heat's off. So turn off the heat, slowly add in the mixture and whisk it about with the tongs. You kind of want to use the pasta as a mop, just like pick it up and scoop it round and round. The point is to try and mix the pasta water and the fats together basically to form that emulsion. And to do that we just kind of need to vigorously create motion so that the egg fats and the bacon fats get mixed up with the water. So yeah, as I suspected, I did add a touch too much pasta water to this, and I guess that's as good as we're getting. Beautiful. Black pepper, a bit of parmesan, and there you go.